The radio crackled at 2:47 a.m., jolting Deputy Sarah Chin from her coffee-stained paperwork. Unit 12, we've got a possible 10 to 54 on County Road 47, mile marker 23. Anonymous caller reports suspicious activity. Her partner, Deputy Marcus Webb, was already reaching for his keys. They'd been working together for 3 years now, and Sarah trusted Marcus more than anyone on the force. He had that steady presence that made even the worst domestic calls manageable. Tonight felt different, though. The rain hammered their patrol car as they drove into the darkness, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. "What kind of suspicious activity?" Sarah asked, checking her notepad. Caller hung up before dispatch could get details. Said something about lights where there shouldn't be any, and they're burying something. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Could be kids screwing around, could be nothing. But Sarah noticed the tension in his voice. In 3 years, she'd never heard Marcus sound nervous about a routine call. They'd handled everything together: overdoses, domestic violence, even a murder-suicide last spring. Marcus always stayed calm, always knew what to do. County Road 47 stretched endlessly through dense pine forest. No streetlights, no houses for miles. Just trees pressing against the asphalt like they were trying to reclaim it. The radio stayed silent except for occasional static bursts. Sarah tried calling dispatch twice, but got nothing but white noise. "Radio's acting up," she muttered. "Storm's probably interfering with the tower." Marcus didn't look at her when he said it. They passed mile marker 20, then 21. Sarah peered through the rain-streaked window, searching for any sign of unusual activity. The forest looked impenetrable, a wall of black shapes that seemed to shift and breathe in the patrol car's headlights. "There," Marcus said suddenly, pointing ahead. "See those lights?" Sarah squinted through the windshield. Deep in the trees, maybe 50 yards off the road, she could make out a faint orange glow. It flickered like a campfire, but steadier. More deliberate. Marcus pulled over and killed the engine. The sudden silence was overwhelming, just rain drumming on the roof and wind whistling through the trees. Sarah reached for her radio, but Marcus caught her wrist. "Wait. Let's see what we're dealing with first." His grip was firm, almost painful. Sarah stared at him, confused. Protocol was clear: always radio your position before investigating. Always maintain contact with dispatch. She'd never known Marcus to ignore procedure. "Marcus, we need to." "Sarah, trust me on this one. Some things are better handled quietly." The way he said it made her stomach clench. There was something in his voice she'd never heard before. Something that sounded almost like fear, but not quite. More like guilt. They grabbed their flashlights and started toward the trees. The forest floor was soggy with fallen leaves and rain runoff. Sarah's boots squelched with each step, and branches caught at her uniform. The orange light grew brighter as they approached, and she could hear voices now, low, urgent conversation she couldn't quite make out. Marcus moved ahead of her with surprising familiarity, as if he knew exactly where he was going. He stepped over fallen logs and ducked under low branches like he'd walked this path before. Sarah struggled to keep up, her flashlight beam dancing wildly as she navigated the undergrowth. "Marcus, slow down." "How do you—" "Quiet," he hissed. "We're almost there." They crested a small rise, and Sarah saw the source of the light. In a cleared area about the size of a basketball court, 3 men stood around what looked like a freshly dug hole. A generator hummed nearby, powering work lights that cast harsh shadows across their faces. One man held a shovel. Another was dragging something heavy wrapped in a blue tarp. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her radio, but Marcus grabbed her arm again. "Don't," he whispered. "Not yet." "Marcus, what the hell is going on? We need to call this in right now." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at the men with an expression Sarah had never seen on his face. Recognition. And something that looked disturbingly like relief. One of the men looked up and saw them. Instead of running or showing surprise, he simply raised his hand in greeting. About time you got here, Webb. Sarah felt the world tilt. The man knew Marcus. Not only knew him, but had been expecting him. Had to make it look right. Marcus called back softly. Brought my partner like we discussed. The words hit Sarah like ice water. Her partner, her trusted partner of 3 years, had planned this. Whatever this was. Marcus. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. What's happening here? For the first time all night, Marcus looked directly at her. In the harsh work lights, his face looked different. Older. Harder. Like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Some people can't be allowed to keep talking. She followed his gaze to the wrapped bundle by the hole. It was roughly the size and shape of a human body. Who is that? She managed to ask. Tommy Briggs, one of the men answered. Kid was asking too many questions about the Patterson case. The Patterson case. Sarah remembered it vaguely. A drug bust that had gone sideways 6 months ago. Marcus had handled most of the paperwork. Said the suspect had resisted arrest, got rough during the takedown. Internal Affairs had cleared them both without much investigation. Tommy was going to Internal Affairs, Marcus said quietly. Said he had evidence that we planted drugs in Patterson's car. Said he had photos. Sarah's mind raced. Tommy Briggs' work dispatch. Had access to case files, radio logs, patrol car GPS data. If he'd been looking into the Patterson case, he was going to destroy both our careers, Sarah. Yours too. You were there that night. The memory came flooding back. She had been there. Had seen Marcus plant the small baggie in Patterson's glove compartment, while she distracted the suspect. Had watched him lie in his report. Had said nothing, told herself she was protecting her partner, protecting the integrity of their unit. I never asked for this, she whispered. Neither did I. But Tommy didn't give us a choice. One of the men cleared his throat impatiently. We need to wrap this up. Dawn's in 3 hours, and I've got a family to get home to. Sarah recognized him now. Lieutenant Rodriguez from Internal Affairs. The same man who'd cleared them in the Patterson investigation. How many others? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Just us, Marcus said. Just the people who knew about Patterson. Who knew what really happened that night. But Sarah was thinking about all the other cases. All the other times Marcus had taken the lead on paperwork. All the times he'd suggested they handle things quietly. How many Tommy Briggses had there been? How many people who'd asked too many questions? Sarah. Marcus's voice was gentle now, almost pleading. Your family. You've always been family. Nothing changes between us. She looked at the hole, at the wrapped body, at the men waiting patiently for her decision. Rain continued to fall, washing away footprints, washing away evidence, washing away any trace that Tommy Briggs had ever been here. What happens now? She asked. Now we finish this. Then we go home. Write up a report about a false alarm on County Road 47. Nobody comes looking for Tommy. He was planning to disappear anyway, start fresh somewhere else. His apartment's already cleaned out. Sarah realized they'd thought of everything. This wasn't a panicked cover-up. This was a carefully planned execution. And if I don't agree? The silence stretched too long. Marcus didn't answer, but Lieutenant Rodriguez shifted his weight, and Sarah caught the outline of his service weapon. Sarah, Marcus said finally, you're already part of this. Have been since Patterson. The only question is whether you're part of the solution. She looked at her partner, really looked at him. The man she trusted with her life, shared coffee with every morning, complained to about paperwork and difficult calls. Had he always been capable of this? Had she simply never noticed, or had she chosen not to see? The rain seemed to grow louder, drowning out her thoughts. In the work lights, the forest looked alien and hostile. She was miles from the nearest house, miles from backup, standing next to an open grave with 3 men who'd already crossed lines she'd never imagined. Her radio crackled suddenly, startling everyone. A burst of static, then a voice. Unit 12, please respond. What's your status? All 4 men looked at her. Waiting. Sarah reached for her radio with a trembling hand. Whatever she said next would determine not just Tommy Briggs' fate, but her own. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she realized Marcus had been right about one thing. She'd been part of this all along. Deputy Jake Morrison watched his German Shepherd, Ranger, circle the abandoned campsite for the 3rd time, whining with confusion. The dog's ears were pinned back, tail tucked low, body language Jake had never seen in 5 years of working together. Whatever scent Ranger was following, it was wrong in ways that made the animal's instincts scream danger. What's he picking up? Deputy Lisa Santos crouched beside the cold fire pit, her flashlight beam cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Rain had been falling steadily for hours, turning the forest floor into a maze of mud and decomposing leaves. I don't know. Jake studied his partner, both the human and canine kind. Ranger was trained to track missing persons, locate drugs, detect explosives. The dog had never failed to communicate what he'd found. Until now. He's acting like he's found something and nothing at the same time. They'd been called out at 4 a.m. Missing hiker, last seen 3 days ago heading into Blackwood State Forest. David Chin, 32, experienced outdoorsman with proper gear and a detailed trail plan filed with the ranger station. His girlfriend had called when he missed their dinner date, and search and rescue had found his abandoned campsite within hours. Everything was still there. Tent, sleeping bag, food, even his wallet and car keys. Like David had simply vanished mid-routine. Could be animal predation, Lisa suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. She'd worked search and rescue for 8 years before transferring to the K-9 unit. She knew what animal attacks looked like. Bear, maybe? Mountain lion? Ranger suddenly stopped circling and sat, staring directly at Lisa. Not at her feet, not past her, but at her face. The dog's brown eyes held an intelligence that made Jake's skin crawl. After a long moment, Ranger let out a low, mournful howl that seemed to echo longer than it should have in the dense trees. That's not normal, Jake muttered. Lisa stood slowly, never breaking eye contact with the dog. Jake, has Ranger ever? I mean, has he ever acted like he recognizes someone he shouldn't? What do you mean? Like he knows something about a person that you don't. Jake felt cold water drip from his hat brim down his neck. Why would you ask that? Before Lisa could answer, Ranger bolted. Not the controlled movement of a tracking dog following a scent trail, but pure panicked flight. The German Shepherd crashed through underbrush, his GPS collar beeping frantically as he put distance between himself and the campsite. Ranger! Here! Jake's commands echoed uselessly through the trees. In 5 years, the dog had never ignored a direct order. Never. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. We need to follow him. He'll come back. He always comes back. Jake, look at me. Lisa's voice carried an urgency that made him turn. In the flashlight beam, her face looked pale, almost sick. There's something I need to tell you about this case. About David Chin. The way she said it made Jake's stomach drop. What kind of something? He wasn't just a hiker. David Chin was a private investigator. He was looking into missing persons cases in this area, going back 15 years. Jake stared at her. How do you know that? Because he contacted me 2 weeks ago. Asked about my time with search and rescue, wanted to know about cases that got closed too quickly. Cases where the evidence didn't add up. Rain continued to fall around them, each drop sounding too loud in the sudden silence. Jake tried to process what Lisa was telling him, but his mind kept circling back to Ranger's behavior. The dog had looked at Lisa like he knew her. Like he was afraid of her. What cases? He asked quietly. Lisa's radio crackled. Unit 47, what's your status? She ignored it. The Morrison case, for one. Jake felt the world tilt. The Morrison case. His sister Emily, who'd gone missing during a camping trip 12 years ago. Search and rescue had found her campsite, but never her body. The case had gone cold after 6 months, and Jake had joined the sheriff's department partly to keep looking for answers. Emily's case? What about it? David found inconsistencies in the original search grid. Areas that should have been covered but weren't. He thought someone on the search team had deliberately avoided certain locations. The radio crackled again. Unit 47, respond immediately. Lisa, answered the radio. She shook her head. David also found something else. Evidence that some of the missing persons cases weren't random. That someone was selecting specific victims. People with no close family, minimal social connections. People who wouldn't be missed for long. Jake's mind raced. His sister Emily had been adopted, estranged from their parents. Few friends, no romantic relationships. She fit Lisa's description perfectly. Why are you telling me this now? Because David's last text message was to me. He said he'd figured out who was responsible. Said he had proof. Lisa's voice was barely audible over the rain. That was 3 days ago. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness behind them. Both deputies spun, flashlights sweeping the tree line. Nothing visible, but Jake could hear movement, something large working its way through the underbrush. Could be Ranger coming back. Lisa whispered. But Jake was thinking about search patterns, about his sister's case, about Lisa's detailed knowledge of missing persons investigations. Lisa, who'd been with search and rescue for 8 years. Lisa, who knew these woods better than anyone. Lisa, who'd suggested they work this case together without backup. Lisa, he said carefully, where exactly did David Chin contact you? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice sounded different. Flatter. At home. You gave a private investigator your home address? He found me. The movement in the trees was getting closer. Not the random crashing of a panicked dog, but deliberate, calculated steps. Someone trying to move quietly through wet forest. Jake's hand drifted toward his service weapon. Who's out there, Lisa? I don't know. But she was lying. Jake could hear it in her voice, could see it in the way she held herself. Lisa knew exactly who was moving through the trees toward them. Just like she'd known exactly where to find David Chen's campsite, even though the coordinates hadn't been in their briefing. Ranger's GPS signal had gone dead. We need to get back to the car, Jake said. There's something else. Lisa's flashlight clicked off, plunging them into near total darkness. David Chen never went missing. Jake fumbled for his own light, but Lisa's hand clamped over his wrist with surprising strength. He found the burial sites. She continued. Found where I've been putting them for the past 12 years. Found your sister. The forest around them had gone completely silent. No rain, no wind, no footsteps. Like the world was holding its breath. Lisa let go of my hand. He was going to destroy everything. Destroy me. Just like Emily was going to expose what she'd seen that night. Lisa's grip tightened. Your sister didn't go missing, Jake. She saw me with the Henderson boy. Saw me leading him away from his campsite. Jake's mind flashed to the Henderson case. Missing teenager, found dead 2 weeks later. Ruled accidental death, exposure and dehydration. Lisa had been part of that search team too. She was going to tell people. Going to ruin my life over some stupid kid who wouldn't have amounted to anything anyway. Jake tried to pull free, but Lisa was stronger than he'd expected. In the darkness, he could hear her breathing change, becoming rapid and shallow. The breathing of someone making a final, desperate decision. I've been protecting you all these years, Jake. Protecting your family's memory. But David Chin was going to make me tell the truth about Emily, about all of them. Where is he? Jake managed to ask. Same place they all are. Same place you're going. The footsteps in the forest started again, but now Jake realized they weren't coming toward them. They were circling, cutting off escape routes. Lisa had planned this. Had probably been planning it since David Chin first contacted her. Ranger knew, didn't he? Jake whispered. That's why he ran. Dogs can smell death, even old death. I've got it all over me now. Jake's radio crackled one final time. Unit 47, if you don't respond, we're sending backup to your location. Lisa laughed softly. They'll find your campsite tomorrow. Evidence of a struggle. Signs that Davidson overpowered you both before disappearing into the forest. Jake felt something cold and sharp press against his ribs. Lisa had drawn a knife, and in the absolute darkness of the forest, he couldn't see her face anymore. Just like Emily. She whispered. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howled. The radio crackled at 11:47 p.m., jolting me from the semi-doze that comes with patrol duty in Millbrook County. 3 years of midnight shifts, and I still wasn't used to how the darkness seemed to swallow the forest roads whole. Unit 12, we've got a wellness check request on Timber Ridge Road. Caller hung up before dispatch could get details. I keyed the mic. Copy that. En route. Timber Ridge Road wound deep into the National Forest, where cell service died and the trees pressed close enough to scrape your mirrors. The kind of place where people move to disappear, from debts, ex-spouses, or just the world in general. Most wellness checks out there were false alarms. Paranoid hermits hearing raccoons, or new residents learning what real isolation sounded like. But as I navigated the winding gravel road, something felt different tonight. My headlights swept across the same familiar landmarks, the rusted mailbox marked Henderson, the fallen oak that maintenance never cleared, but the shadows seemed deeper, more watchful. The address led to a small cabin set back about 50 yards from the road. No lights on inside, but a newer model Honda Civic sat in the driveway. Steam still rose from its hood. I approached the front door, flashlight in hand, noting the curtains were drawn tight across every window. Not unusual for the area, but the fabric looked deliberately arranged. Overlapped. Like someone had taken great care to ensure no gaps. Sheriff's Department. I called, knocking firmly. We received a call requesting a wellness check. Silence. But underneath it, something else. A soft, rhythmic sound I couldn't quite place. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Protocol said I should radio for backup on isolated calls, but the nearest unit was 40 minutes away, and this looked routine. The front door was unlocked, another red flag. Nobody left doors unlocked out here, not with the transient population that drifted through the forest. Inside, my flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness. The soft sound was clearer now, breathing. Slow, measured breathing coming from somewhere deeper in the cabin. Sheriff's Department. I announced again, hand instinctively moving to my service weapon. I'm coming in to check on your welfare. The cabin's main room looked normal enough. Modest furniture, a few dishes in the sink, mail stacked on a side table. But as I moved through the space, details began to register. The mail was all addressed to different names. David Chen, Margaret Foster, Robert Valdez, all at this same address. The breathing sound led me toward what looked like a bedroom. The door stood slightly ajar, and as I nudged it open with my boot, my flashlight illuminated something that made my blood freeze. A man sat perfectly still in a chair facing the window, back turned to me. He wore dark clothing and hadn't moved when I entered. On a small table beside him sat what looked like a high-end camera with a telephoto lens, pointed out through a gap in the curtains. Sir? My voice came out rougher than intended. Sir, I need you to respond. Nothing. I moved closer, noting the unnatural stillness of his posture. When I reached out to touch his shoulder, he was cold. Had been for hours. That's when I noticed what he'd been photographing. Through the carefully arranged gap in the curtains, the camera had a perfect view of the road. More specifically, it had a clear shot of the exact spot where I'd parked my patrol car. Where any law enforcement vehicle would naturally stop when responding to this address. My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. Unit 12, what's your status on that wellness check? I keyed the mic with a shaking hand. I've got a deceased individual here. Requesting backup and the coroner. Copy that. ETA 40 minutes for backup. 40 minutes? alone with a dead man who'd been photographing the road. I began searching the cabin more thoroughly, trying to understand what I'd stumbled into. In the bedroom closet, I found them. Hundreds of photographs, all taken from this same window. Different patrol cars. Different deputies. All of us who worked the night shift in this sector. The photos were organized by date, going back months. Some had notes written on the back in tight, careful handwriting. Unit 15 arrives 11:30, stays 12 minutes. Unit 8 always parks facing east. Deputy Martinez checks perimeter first. Someone had been studying us, learning our patterns, our habits, our individual approaches to calls in this isolated area. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding the folder labeled Phase 2, hidden behind the photographs. Inside were detailed floor plans of the sheriff's station, shift schedules, personal information about every deputy on the night rotation, home addresses, family members' names, children's school schedules, and maps. Hand-drawn maps of routes between the station and the most remote locations in our patrol area. Routes where a deputy would be alone, out of radio contact, for extended periods. My hands were shaking as I photographed everything with my phone, though I doubted the images would be clear enough to matter. The dead man in the chair had become secondary to the larger horror taking shape. This wasn't random. This was preparation. But preparation for what? I was bagging the evidence when I heard it, the soft crunch of gravel outside. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. My backup wasn't due for another 20 minutes. I drew my weapon and moved to the window, peering through the same gap the dead man had used for his surveillance. Nothing visible in the immediate area around my patrol car, but the footsteps continued. A slow, methodical circuit around the building. My radio was silent. Either whoever was out there didn't have one, or they were maintaining radio silence for a reason. The footsteps stopped directly outside the back door. I waited, weapon drawn, listening to my own heartbeat. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold, the soft beep of a radio being keyed. Not over the official channels. A different frequency. Subject secured inside. A voice whispered through the walls. Proceeding to Phase 2. That's when I realized the wellness call had never been random. Someone had been watching this location, waiting for a deputy to respond alone. The dead man wasn't the threat, he was the bait. And I'd walked right into their trap. What I discovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about our patrol procedures. The evidence suggested this wasn't the first time. Photos of other deputies, other crime scenes, other, routine, calls that had gone wrong over the past year. Deputies who'd reported equipment malfunctions in remote areas. Officers who'd requested backup that never seemed to arrive on time. The pattern had been there all along, hidden in the routine chaos of police work. Someone had been testing our response times, our communication protocols, our backup procedures. Learning exactly how long they'd have alone with an isolated deputy before help could arrive. The truth behind those equipment failures was so much worse than I could have imagined. They weren't random. They were rehearsals. I had minutes, maybe less, before whoever was outside decided to make their move. The radio was still silent on official channels, but I could hear periodic whispers on that other frequency. Multiple voices now, coordinating positions around the cabin. My service weapon felt inadequate against organized opposition. These weren't random criminals. They were prepared, methodical, and they'd been planning this for months. I tried my radio again, keeping my voice low. Dispatch, Unit 12. I need immediate backup at my location. Multiple suspects on scene. Static. Either my radio was being jammed, or they'd found a way to block official frequencies while maintaining their own communications. The back door handle turned slowly. That's when I realized the dead man in the chair wasn't random either. I recognized him now from the employee photos at the station. He'd been the night janitor who'd quit suddenly 3 months ago. The one who'd had access to our schedules, our patrol routes, our personal information. He hadn't quit. He'd been recruited. And now he was a message. A demonstration of what happened to people who outlived their usefulness to whoever was orchestrating this. The final piece of the puzzle changed everything, and there was no going back. In the folder marked Phase 2, underneath all the surveillance photos and patrol schedules, I found a list. Names of every deputy who worked nights in isolated areas. My name was third from the top. But it wasn't a target list. It was a recruitment roster. Each name had a notation beside it. Financial problems. Custody battles. Gambling debts. Medical bills. Personal vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Ways to apply pressure until someone broke and agreed to cooperate. The notation beside my name read, Mother's cancer treatment $47,000 outstanding. Daughter's college applications pending. Mortgage 3 months behind. Information that wasn't in any official file. Information that could only come from someone with intimate access to our personal lives. Someone inside the department. The back door opened silently, and I heard boots on the kitchen floor. Professional movement. Tactical training. These weren't random criminals. They were law enforcement. Or had been. My radio crackled once more, this time on the official channel. Unit 12, backup is delayed due to a multi-vehicle accident on Highway 9. ETA now 70 minutes. The voice was familiar. Dispatcher Sarah Chin, who'd worked the night desk for 5 years. Who knew every deputy's personal situation. Who had access to all our schedules and could delay backup indefinitely. I had seconds to decide, and my choice would determine everything. Stay and fight against unknown odds, or try to escape through the front while they entered from the back. Either way, I was outnumbered and outgunned by people who'd been planning this encounter for months. But as I moved toward the front door, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. This wasn't about eliminating deputies who couldn't be turned. It was about demonstrating what happened to those who refused to cooperate. The dead janitor had been their inside man until he'd outlived his usefulness. Now they needed someone with more access. More authority. More ability to influence patrol schedules and response times. They weren't here to kill me. They were here to recruit me. And they knew exactly which pressure points would make me agree. What happened in those next few moments will stay with me forever, because I discovered something about myself I never wanted to know. When they showed me the photos of my daughter walking to school, when they mentioned my mother's chemotherapy schedule, when they calmly explained how easy it would be to arrange accidents for everyone I cared about, I realized I'd been wrong about my own moral limits. The corruption in Millbrook County wasn't random. It was systematic. And it spread exactly the way cancer spreads, one cell at a time, until the entire organism was compromised. 6 months later, I'm still on the night shift. Still responding to wellness checks on Timber Ridge Road. Still filing reports that paint routine pictures of routine calls. But now I know who's watching from the forest. And they know I'm watching back. The rain that falls on Millbrook County these days sounds different to me. Like whispers. Like footsteps. Like the soft click of camera shutters capturing evidence of things that can never be reported. Because some truths are too dangerous to survive, and some watchers never stop watching once they've found you. Last week, a new deputy started on the night shift. Young. Eager. Financial problems from his divorce. I've been assigned to train him on our patrol procedures. His name is already in their files. The body cam footage stopped at 2:47 a.m., exactly when I needed it most. 3 hours later, sitting in the sheriff's office, I couldn't explain why the video showed me doing things I had no memory of doing. "Run it again," Sheriff Morrison said, his voice tight with something between concern and suspicion. The footage began normally enough. My patrol of the Blackwood Forest Preserve, responding to reports of illegal camping. The timestamp showed 2:15 a.m. as I walked the trail, my flashlight cutting through darkness that seemed absolute on the recording. But I remembered that night differently. I remembered moonlight. I remembered being able to see the forest path clearly. At 2:43 a.m., the audio captured my voice saying, "Dispatch, I've got eyes on the suspect. Moving to intercept. But I never made that call. I would have remembered. Then came the part that made my skin crawl. On screen, I watched myself approach a figure sitting by a small campfire. The person looked directly at the camera, at me, and spoke in a voice I recognized but couldn't place. "You're right on time, Deputy Wells." The footage showed me nodding, as if this was expected. As if this was planned. But I had no memory of any of it. The video quality degraded after that, becoming grainy and distorted, but the audio remained clear. My voice, having a conversation I never remembered having, with someone whose face the camera couldn't quite capture due to the fire's glare and digital interference. "The programming is complete," the figure said. "You won't remember any of this until activation." "Understood," my voice replied on the recording. Then the footage cut to black at 2:47 a.m. When it resumed at 5:12 a.m., I was back in my patrol car, filling out a routine report about finding no suspicious activity in the preserve. Morrison paused the video. "Tom, I need you to be straight with me. Do you remember making contact with anyone last night?" I stared at the frozen screen showing my own handwriting on a report I didn't remember completing. "No, Sheriff. I swept the entire preserve. Found nothing but some old fire rings from day hikers." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. The body cam didn't lie. The timestamp was continuous. The GPS data from my patrol car confirmed I'd been in that exact location at that exact time. So why couldn't I remember 3 hours of my own life? Morrison sent me home pending an internal investigation. Standard procedure when an officer experienced gaps in memory during duty hours. But as I drove through town, pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand began falling into place. My phone had 17 missed calls from my ex-wife Sarah, all from between 2:30 and 3:15 a.m. When I called her back, her voice was shaky. "Tom? Thank God. I was so worried when you didn't answer." "Answer what?" "You called while I was on patrol." Silence. Then, "Tom, you called me. At 2:47 a.m. You were different. You asked me questions about Emma's school schedule, about my work routine. Specific questions. Like you were taking notes." Emma was our 8-year-old daughter. Sarah had full custody after the divorce, and I saw Emma every other weekend. Why would I need to know her schedule in that much detail? What exactly did I ask? Which route I take to drop her off? What time I leave for work? Whether I ever vary my routine? Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Tom, it scared me. You sounded like you, but you were asking questions like someone planning something." I hung up and checked my phone's call log. Sure enough, there was an outgoing call to Sarah at 2:47 a.m. Duration 18 minutes. A call I had absolutely no memory of making. That evening, I drove back to Blackwood Forest. Not officially, I was suspended pending investigation, but I needed to understand what had happened in those missing hours. The preserve was closed after dark, but I knew the back entrance from years of patrol. Armed with my personal flashlight and a growing sense of dread, I retraced the path from my body cam footage. Everything looked different in person than it did on the recording. The trees seemed closer together. The trail markers were in different positions than I remembered. I found the clearing where the campfire had been. No trace of ash or burned wood. The ground looked undisturbed, as if no one had camped there in months. But something else was wrong. My flashlight began flickering, then died completely. I pulled out my phone to use its light, but the screen showed no signal. Impossible, since the preserve had full coverage from the cell tower just 2 miles away. In the darkness, I heard something that made my blood freeze. My own voice, carried on the wind, having a conversation with someone I couldn't see. "Phase 1 is complete. The subject has been successfully programmed." The voice was coming from deeper in the forest, but it was definitely mine. Same inflection, same cadence, same slight drawl I'd picked up from 20 years in rural law enforcement. I followed the sound, stumbling through underbrush in complete darkness. The conversation continued, growing clearer as I got closer. Memory suppression is holding. He has no recollection of the conditioning session. And the behavioral triggers? This was a different voice, one I didn't recognize. Installed and tested. He called his ex-wife exactly as programmed, gathering intelligence without conscious awareness. I emerged into another clearing, this one dominated by equipment I'd never seen before. Banks of computers, satellite dishes, and what looked like medical monitoring devices. All of it powered by a generator that hummed quietly in the darkness. But the clearing was empty. No people. Just the equipment and the sound of my own voice coming from speakers I couldn't locate. Begin Phase 2. Target acquisition and elimination protocols. That's when I understood. The missing hours. The phone call to Sarah. The questions about routines and schedules. Someone had programmed me to gather intelligence on my own family, and I'd done it without question or memory. But programmed how? And by whom? I approached the nearest computer terminal. The screen showed a complex interface I didn't recognize, but one section was clearly labeled. Subject 47 Deputy Thomas Wells Conditioning Status. Below that, a detailed psychological profile that knew things about me I'd never told anyone. My PTSD from a shooting incident 3 years ago. My guilt over the divorce. My fear that I was becoming like my alcoholic father. Every vulnerability mapped and catalogued. And at the bottom of the screen, a simple status indicator. Phase 2, armed. What I discovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about my own mind. The computer logs showed dozens of conditioning sessions over the past 6 months. Every time I'd patrolled Blackwood Forest alone, I'd been brought to this clearing. Every time, I'd undergone what the files called behavioral modification therapy. Each session had layered new programming over my natural personality, creating a secondary set of responses that could be triggered without my conscious knowledge. I was essentially two people sharing one body, and only one of us knew what the other was doing. The truth behind those missing hours was so much worse than I could have imagined. I wasn't just being programmed to gather intelligence. According to the files, I was being turned into an assassin. The target information was all there: Sarah's daily routine, Emma's school schedule, even the security protocols at my ex-wife's workplace. Someone wanted them eliminated, and they were using me as the weapon. But who? And why? I scrolled through more files, looking for answers. The project was labeled Sleeper Protocol, and involved what appeared to be involuntary behavioral modification of law enforcement personnel. The goal was to create programmable assets who could carry out operations with complete deniability, since they would have no memory of their actions. My file wasn't the only one. Deputy Martinez from the next county over. State Trooper Johnson from the Highway Patrol. Even FBI Agent Chen from the regional office. All of us had been conditioned, all of us had gaps in our memory, and all of us had been given targets. A shadow fell across the computer screen. I spun around to find someone standing at the edge of the clearing. My height, my build, wearing my uniform. In the dim glow from the computer monitors, I could see his face clearly. It was me. Exactly me, down to the scar on my left hand from a childhood accident. "Hello, Tom," he said in my voice. "We need to talk." That's when I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I wasn't the original Deputy Thomas Wells. I was the programmed copy, and I just discovered my creator. The real Tom Wells had been replaced months ago, after the first conditioning session went wrong and created two distinct personalities instead of one controllable asset. They'd kept us both, using the original for complex operations that required full cognitive function, and me for simple tasks that didn't require knowing the larger picture. Until tonight, when something in the programming had glitched, and I'd gained access to memories that weren't supposed to be mine. Phase 2 was supposed to begin tomorrow, the other Tom said, approaching slowly. You were going to eliminate Sarah and Emma, then have no memory of doing it. The perfect crime, since you genuinely believe in your innocence. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The clearing was surrounded on all sides by dense forest, and my other self knew the terrain as well as I did. But you've seen too much now, he continued, The programming is breaking down. We can't risk you remembering at an inconvenient time. The final piece of the puzzle changed everything, and there was no going back. In my jacket pocket, I found a device I didn't remember placing there. A small transmitter with a single red button. The computer files called it a termination switch. One press would send a signal that would permanently shut down the conditioning equipment and free every law enforcement officer who'd been programmed. But it would also trigger a failsafe that would eliminate anyone who knew about the project, including both versions of me. What happened in those next few moments will stay with me forever, because I had to choose between saving my family and saving myself. The other Tom was advancing, and I could see the cold calculation in his eyes, my eyes, that came from months of conditioning. He was no longer human in any meaningful sense. Just a programmed machine wearing my face. I pressed the button. The clearing erupted in sparks as the equipment overloaded and died. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear similar explosions as other conditioning sites shut down simultaneously. The network was dead, the programmed officers would slowly regain their memories, and the people behind this would lose their invisible army. But the failsafe was already activating. I could feel it in my mind like a switch being thrown. The artificial memories that had sustained my existence were dissolving, taking my consciousness with them. As I collapsed beside the burning wreckage, the other Tom smiled with what looked like relief. "Thank you," he whispered, and I realized he'd been trapped just as much as I had been. The rain started as we lay there in the clearing, two identical bodies sharing one last moment of clarity. In the distance, I could hear sirens responding to reports of explosions in the forest. By the time they found us, there would be only one Deputy Thomas Wells remaining. The real one, freed from months of conditioning, with no memory of what he'd been programmed to do. But he would wake up to find 17 missed calls from his ex-wife, asking why he'd called her with such strange questions. And somewhere in his mind, buried but not gone, would be the knowledge that he'd been turned into something monstrous. Something that could happen again, to anyone, at any time. The rain washes away evidence, but it can't wash away the truth. We're all just signals waiting to be lost. The missing hiker's GPS signal died exactly where the old logging road ended, 3 miles deeper into Hollow Creek wilderness than any civilian had business being. 24 hours later, I was following that same signal's last known coordinates, knowing that in these mountains, 24 hours could mean the difference between a rescue and a recovery. Sheriff's departments in rural counties don't get much funding for search and rescue equipment, so I was tracking on foot with nothing but a handheld GPS, emergency radio, and the kind of growing dread that comes from 20 years of finding people who didn't want to be found. The hiker was Dr. Amanda Morrison, a botanist from the State University who'd been studying rare plant species in protected wilderness areas. Her department had called when she missed her scheduled check-in. Professional, experienced, and carrying a satellite communicator that should have made her impossible to lose. But people disappeared in Hollow Creek. Had been for decades. The trail she'd been following was barely visible, more of a deer path than anything marked on Forest Service maps. It wound through stands of old-growth timber where the canopy blocked most daylight, creating a perpetual twilight that made my flashlight necessary even at noon. 3 hours in, I found her campsite. Tent still standing, sleeping bag laid out, camp stove with a half-eaten meal still sitting on the folding table. Her backpack was there, along with her research notebooks and camera equipment. But Dr. Morrison was gone, and her satellite communicator was smashed to pieces beside the cold fire ring. The scene looked staged. Too neat. Too deliberate. Like someone had arranged everything to suggest she'd simply walked away from camp and vanished into the wilderness. But the ground around the campsite told a different story. Multiple sets of boot prints, all heading in the same direction. Away from the marked trail and deeper into the forest, toward an area my maps showed as blank wilderness. I followed the tracks for another 2 miles before I started hearing the voices. Distant at first, carried on the wind between the trees. Multiple people talking, but too far away to make out words. The sound led me to a ridge overlooking a valley I'd never seen on any map, despite patrolling this area for over a decade. Below me, nestled in a clearing beside a stream, was a settlement that shouldn't have existed. Half a dozen cabins arranged around a central building that looked like a meeting house or church. Solar panels on the roofs, a vegetable garden, even what appeared to be a small workshop. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and I could see people moving between the buildings. This wasn't some remote homestead. This was an established community, hidden in one of the most inaccessible parts of the wilderness, completely off any official record. And Dr. Morrison was there, sitting on the porch of the central building, apparently engaged in animated conversation with a man I didn't recognize. I watched through binoculars as she gestured toward her research materials, which someone had apparently retrieved from her campsite. She didn't look distressed or coerced. She looked like she was giving a presentation. But something was wrong with the scene. The longer I observed, the more details registered that didn't fit. The other people in the settlement moved with an odd synchronization, like they were following invisible choreography. Their conversations had a rehearsed quality, even from a distance. And Dr. Morrison kept glancing toward the forest, as if she knew someone was watching. I needed backup, but my radio was getting nothing but static. The GPS showed my location as coordinates that didn't correspond to any landmark I recognized. According to the device, I was standing in an area that should have been nothing but unbroken wilderness. As the afternoon wore on, I realized the settlement wasn't what it appeared to be. The people weren't just living there, they were performing. Going through the motions of daily life, but with an artificial quality that became more apparent as I watched. Dr. Morrison was the only one who looked genuinely human. By evening, I understood I was witnessing something deliberate. The settlement was a trap, and Dr. Morrison was the bait, whether she knew it or not. But a trap for what? Or who? The answer came as darkness fell and the settlement's true purpose became clear. Lights came on in the buildings, but they weren't electric lights. They were fires, carefully arranged to create specific patterns visible from above. Signal fires. Someone was trying to attract attention from aircraft. But not rescue aircraft. As I watched, a small plane circled the valley twice before landing on what I now realized was a concealed airstrip carved out of the forest floor. Men emerged from the aircraft and were greeted by the settlement's residents with a coordination that spoke of long practice. This wasn't a community. It was a way station. A hidden stop on some kind of smuggling route that used the vast wilderness as cover. And Dr. Morrison had stumbled into it while doing her research. I needed to get closer, but approaching the settlement meant crossing open ground where I'd be visible to anyone watching. Instead, I worked my way around the valley's rim, looking for a better vantage point. That's when I found the graves. Hidden in a grove of trees above the settlement, partially concealed by fallen logs and natural vegetation. Some were marked with simple wooden crosses, others with just piles of stones. At least a dozen burial sites, all recent based on the condition of the disturbed earth. Dr. Morrison wasn't the first person to discover this place. And based on the number of graves, most discoveries didn't end well. What I discovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I'd been patrolling for 2 decades. Carved into the bark of nearby trees were initials and dates, left by people who'd known they might not survive to tell their stories. JK 2019. If you find this, tell my family I tried to get home. Sarah Chin 2021. They're not what they pretend to be. Mike Rodriguez 2023. The plane comes every full moon. Don't let them see you. 27 names over the past 8 years. Hikers, researchers, hunters who'd ventured too deep into Hollow Creek and found something they weren't supposed to see. The truth behind the settlement was so much worse than I could have imagined. These weren't smugglers using the wilderness as cover. They were hunters, and the wilderness was their preserve. The settlement was a honey trap designed to lure isolated individuals deep into the forest where they could be captured, studied, and ultimately disposed of without anyone knowing what had happened to them. Dr. Morrison wasn't being held there. She was being evaluated. They were deciding whether she could be useful to their operation or if she represented a threat that needed to be eliminated. And now they knew someone else was in the area. I could see them organizing search parties, preparing to sweep the forest for the person who'd been watching from the ridge. I had maybe an hour before they found me, and no way to call for backup. My only chance was to create enough of a distraction to get Dr. Morrison out of there, and hope we could reach civilization before they tracked us down. But as I worked my way back toward the settlement, I realized I'd made a critical error. The graves weren't just burial sites for victims. They were trophies. Each one marked with details about the person's final moments, their last words, their attempts to escape. And at the center of the grove, freshly dug, was a grave marked with my name and badge number. They'd been expecting me. That's when I realized Dr. Morrison's distress call had never been about getting lost in the wilderness. It had been bait, designed to lure a lone law enforcement officer into the forest where he could be isolated and eliminated. The settlement wasn't just a way station for smuggling operations. It was a facility for something much worse. The research materials they'd taken from Dr. Morrison weren't about botany. They were about human behavior under extreme stress. Psychological studies conducted on isolated subjects who had no chance of escape. And I was about to become their next research subject. The final piece of the puzzle changed everything, and there was no going back. Hidden among the grave markers, I found a logbook wrapped in waterproof material. Inside were detailed records of every person who disappeared in Hollow Creek over the past decade. But they weren't victims. They were participants. Dr. Morrison's name was in the book, along with detailed notes about her psychological profile and specific triggers that could be used to manipulate her behavior. She hadn't stumbled into the settlement by accident. She'd been recruited, just like all the others. The graves weren't memorials to the dead. They were graduation ceremonies for people who'd successfully completed their transformation from ordinary citizens into something else entirely. What happened in those next few moments will stay with me forever, because I realized the radio static I'd been hearing wasn't equipment failure. It was jamming, designed to prevent me from calling for backup. But it was also masking something else. Other voices. Other law enforcement officers who'd been lured into the same trap over the years. Their radio calls growing fainter as they moved deeper into the forest, following false trails that led them away from civilization and toward the settlement. I wasn't the first sheriff's deputy to investigate disappearances in Hollow Creek. I was just the latest in a long line of officers who'd been carefully selected and manipulated into becoming part of the operation. The settlement needed law enforcement personnel who could provide cover for their activities. Officers who could file false reports, misdirect investigations, and ensure that anyone who got too close to the truth simply disappeared into the wilderness. Dr. Morrison approached through the trees, no longer pretending to be a victim. Her smile was cold and calculating, and she moved with the same artificial coordination I'd observed in the other residents. "Welcome to Hollow Creek, Sheriff Martinez," she said. "We've been waiting for you." I had seconds to decide, and my choice would determine everything. Run and hope I could reach civilization before they tracked me down, or stay and try to understand what I'd stumbled into. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized there was a third option. One that had been planned from the moment I'd received that first missing person report. Join them. The logbook contained detailed psychological profiles of every law enforcement officer in the county. They'd been studying us for years, waiting for the right combination of isolation, financial stress, and personal vulnerability that would make us susceptible to recruitment. My ex-wife's medical bills. My daughter's college tuition. My growing certainty that 20 years of police work had accomplished nothing meaningful. They knew exactly which pressure points would make me consider their offer. "You can't stop what's happening here," Dr. Morrison continued. "But you can be part of something larger. Something that makes a real difference." Behind her, I could see other figures emerging from the settlement. People I recognized from missing person reports going back years. All of them transformed, all of them committed to whatever purpose this place served. And all of them looking at me with the same expectant expression. The rain started then, drumming against the forest canopy with a sound like distant applause. In the growing darkness, the settlement's lights created an almost welcoming glow. I thought about my empty house, my failed marriage, my growing cynicism about law enforcement in a world that seemed to get worse every year. I thought about the graves marked with names of people who'd chosen differently. And I made my decision. The radio in my pocket crackled to life one last time, transmitting my final official report. Unit 7 to dispatch. Dr. Morrison located and recovered. Case closed. Then I switched it off and followed Dr. Morrison toward the lights of the settlement, where my new life was waiting to begin. Some people disappear into the wilderness by accident. Others choose to vanish completely. And some of us discover we were never really who we thought we were to begin with. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.